Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, we're going to go ahead and speak about some of the matters you've seen on the front pages. Some reflected as insecurity. Governors re-strategize to contain menace, kidnapping along Lagos, I beg your pardon, Abuja-Kaduna Expressway. The gunmen killing Catholic priests. So the Minister of Interior, Defense, they've got their job cut out for them. So those are some of the issues we'll be highlighting here this morning. I've got two gentlemen here with me to shed some light. They should know a thing or two about security. We've got Aliyu Umar, security expert, and then we also do have retired Colonel Hassan Stan Labo, security consultant. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on this morning.
Thanks so much.
Good morning.
Well, ever since the ministers, came on stream, we've not actually said that much of a look in terms of what to expect from them. But since you both have been in service, you know how service works, you know the man there at the moment. Let's start with that before we go into all of this, because he's the one saddled with a lot of that responsibility to ensure that things go well. What should we expect from him? Let me start with you, Mr.
Labo. That's, so to speak, setting the agenda, maybe.
Yes.
Am I right? Yes.
And having known the man, what do you think Nigerians should expect? What is he bringing to the table?
Yeah, I see him as somebody who can deliver. If only he's got the right hands to work with around him. I think he's somebody who can really deliver. We're blessed in his type of person in that he cuts out, to a greater extent, the sort of qualities I would say the president has. He has a Spartan lifestyle. He's not your ostentatious type, and so on.
That's the Minister of Defense.
Yes, I'm talking about the Minister of Defense, a fine gentleman, And when you begin to have people with this sort of qualities in place, you should expect better things, because his eyes are not on how much he wants to garner to himself by way of material gains and so on, but serving his country. It's somebody I know quite closely, having served as his ADC in those way back as a junior officer. What do we expect of him? I expect that the security situation now in the country should be agitating his mind. The situation in the Northeast, and of course, the ongoing banditry and so on. All right? And if these things are agitating his mind, I expect that he will be looking at what I call the fundamentals, the operational fundamentals that affect what has been going on all along. And by these fundamentals, I'm looking at the issues of funding, manpower. Are there resource gaps? Yes, there are. Manpower, okay? Equipment and logistics. Can we revisit our table of equipment as a military? This is against the backdrop of the fact that in ordinary parlance, as civilians, you always hear that, oh, Boko Haram is better armed than we are. Yes, you draw such a conclusion because you lack the understanding that the Nigerian army is a regular army that works on a table of equipment, one. Two, it's a regular army that abides by certain international norms. A situation where Boko Haram fires anti-aircraft weapon in direct role at human beings is unheard of. No regular army will do that. It's meant for aircraft. You fire it into people, and all of a sudden 50 guys are down. You clear off a whole camp, and so on. And they are not in any form of check. In fact, Amnesty International does not even see that. But you dare try it. The entire world will find out that, are you sure you are a regular army? And so on. So we have to revisit our table of equipment, see how we can probably beef up the weaponry and some other holdings we use. If we beef that up at the section platoon level, as it goes up, it will enhance on firepower. Okay? Now, we need to also, he's got to also revisit, take a look at training and welfare of the troops, in the field, and ensure that things work out well. He's somebody who has been so concerned about the welfare of troops. Haven't known him as closely as I used to know him way back in those days when he was a general officer commanding, and so on. The fact remains that we have somebody who, take away the aspect of whether age might now be telling on him. But if we want to say, who is this gentleman?
Okay.
I think he's got it all.
At that point, let me ask Mr. Mark, can we take that away, the age component?
Well, not quite. In the sense that, incidentally, we both served under the same GOC. At a point, I was tipped to be his ADC, but he beat me to it and became ADC. But that was the same time, the same general. And my concerns remain the fact that I see with reason that we may have what you can call a generation clash in our choice of a Minister of Defense. From 29th of May, 1999, up and up to today is 29th too, right? 2019, we've had 20 wonderful
Today is actually
democracy years. Today is 30th, sorry. We had some 2019 thereabout years, within which we have actually churned out 7 and retired military officers who have caught their seat in the thick and mix of the democracy of things. I could even say the democracy of defense. Sometime, a short while ago, if you recall, a sitting president made the choice of a Minister of Defense from the past. And that Minister of Defense called a meeting of service chiefs, and they didn't show up. That was unfortunate, that was sad, but it happened. For me, looking from the sidelines, those unwritten, unstated, unmentioned dynamics begin to look like facts to me. The reason why is probably those service chiefs felt, this man will not connect with us. Now, without casting aspersion on anyone, I tend to feel that in these 20 years of democracy, the insurgency debacle is some 12 years or thereabouts old. If we picked someone from within this number of years who caught his teeth right in the thick and mix of it, it connects more with the institution, the employees, the staffing of the Ministry of Defense as it sits today. For the incumbent, the present minister, there has to be that curing period for him to come abreast. We don't doubt his past experiences, we don't doubt his antecedents. But then when you are coming back from that far, there has to be a stage, a curing time, if you want, where you will have to really sink back in and get your time.
Are we going to lose much?
It all depends.
During that period?
It's left to be seen. I am someone who advocates for doing things with persons who can hit the ground running. I know a lot of senior, serving, and retired military officers of the last 10, 12, 15 years who will come in and relate more cogently with the facts on ground than the incumbent. Going back in time, if we were to also pick, say, okay, we had no choice, we had to pick from 22, 20, 30 years back, then it is also apt for us to remember that the choice of a leader itself makes a statement. So from the outside, what comes across to the observer, the inside workings of the ministerial list, its composition and who made it or not is not known to me. What I'm most interested in is what comes across to those observing home and abroad.
Add to that, when they talk about security, you know, it's particularly peculiar to this administration because the president, the commander-in-chief, has got to the highest level in this country in that particular regard. So if he's making that choice, shouldn't we trust his judgment?
We do want to trust the judgment of a commander-in-chief. We do want to, mind you, I say want to. But then you need to be encouraged to trust the judgment of your commander-in-chief. probably if the designations of each of those who made the list, the intended designations, was known, people would
as
have...
they say in law, the drafters of the
exactly,
law.
people would have thrown in one or two comments that would have guided the commander-in-chief. But if I'm to take a pulse shot of what I want to call perceptions from the outside, then what I'm telling you is that the first thing is within military circles and outside of military circles, people are expectant that there is still between 22 years and now enough wonderful, sterling military officers. Some are even still serving. And it helps us do what you can call a back-to-back transition of things defense. That's why I said the democracy of things, or even the democracy of defense. So you find out that you have people who are coming in and are good to go and do not need any curing time to come abreast. Let me give you an example. If a few months after he left service, he was given a political appointment or a public office to hold that was defense related, that he left a few months ago means he could call you and say, Chamberlain, I want this document. In fact, that document is in so-so-so drawer, in so-so-so file, because I left it there. Right. So there's back-to-back continuity. You know the boys know you.
Okay, so if I may, pardon me now, this is where we found ourselves. I mean, there's issues of kidnapping, banditry. I mean, we have communal clashes also. I can go on and on. This is where we are right now. And I want to believe that that is the aim of the cabinet, especially the Ministry of Defense, Interior, Ministry of Police Affairs, to ensure that we find our way out of this and have a sustainable model moving forward. So now this is for you, sir. Moving forward, we have found ourselves in this, but then we understand that some of these challenges should actually be in the purview of the Nigeria Police Force. But interestingly, we need help. That's why we have the military in. So we're looking at a situation where, as we move towards the ideal, we also have a good working relation between the military and the police. We've seen this happen in recent times where there's been a clash. So how do we handle this such that as we move towards the ideal, we don't have clashes that keep setting us back?
Well, it will have to do with a great deal of what I'll call service cooperation. Okay? And, well, some level of training too that will bring about some amount of integration. And then, of course, reorientation too of the military. Why am I talking about reorientation? If you are introducing, because like it is today, the reality on ground is that we have the military engaged in internal security duties in well over 32 states. That is a reality on ground, even though we all know that that shouldn't have been the ideal situation. But there is no responsible government that will fold its arms and see lives and property at risk or with heavy threat towards lives and property, and will tell you, no, the military should not come in because it's not their statutory function. The first and foremost, the government has a social contract to the people, which of course it wants to meet up with, protect lives and property, so bring in the military. Now, if you've got to bring in the military, we must understand the basic difference in terms of training between the military and the police. So if you are bringing in the military to play a police role by virtue of the internal security duties it will find itself doing, then there must be some level of reorientation. The soldier who has been taught to shoot to kill, which is the concept governing his training, is got to understand now that you are going into a role where you are expected to shoot to maim for prosecution, which is the concept governing the policeman's own training, because you are going into a police role. These are some of the aspects we have to address for real harmonious operations in the field and so on. And then, of course, we talked about synergy, cooperation, and all the rest stuff. You know.
Let me go to Abuja. Markwe has got a question for you both as well. Markwe?
Well, synergy continues to be an issue, and it's a it's a nice thing that you have raised that issue of cooperation and the issue of orientation of the different services. So the military services are taught to shoot to kill, while the police is shoot to maim. Now, we have a situation where we know that relationships or relations have now been strained as a result of the incident in Taraba. We also know that it's a challenge, among sister military agencies, to work as one. Talking about, making reference to what Captain Umar said about a former defense chief who was asked, who asked to see defense or to see military chiefs, service chiefs, and eyebrows were raised. I do understand that particular moment, and I know that one of the questions raised by the service chiefs was whether the Minister of Defense had any powers to summon service chiefs. According to them, at that time, they only reported to the president. The president is the commander-in-chief. How do you think that matters of synergy can be handled, not just among sister military agencies, because one would assume that the defense headquarters is supposed to coordinate the affairs of the military agencies. That is yet to be seen, but also among other sister security agencies, especially now that they're involved in internal security operations. This is to both of you.
Okay. In response to your question, Mawkwe, inter and intra-service rivalry is to man as man is to it. Why I say man is, even within our families, we do have, you know, our little camps and factions and alliances, particularly here in Africa where we run extended family kind of things. Now, what I'm trying to say here is we have this egocentrism alive and well within us, not only as individuals, but as agencies, as institutions. It's a man thing, it's a human thing. How do we drive it forward? How do we begin to see people who will cooperate, whether they like it or yes? It's simple. Results. You see, when you are not held to results, that's when you begin to know whose head is bigger or smaller and who you should align with. If you are held to results and you either meet the timelines, your key performance indicators are square, you are either going to toe that line or not, believe me, the differences fade away. You start to work. When you have a common goal to achieve and each of you knows that his own part of achieving that goal is directly tied to your achieving yours, then you are not going to be interested in the color of his uniform or the kind of weapon he's carrying or if you are an elder sibling or not. And that's where we are a bit laid back in this part of the world. It's not only about the military or security agencies. Once we are able to go into what you want to call the corporate governance of military operations, we ask you what part of this menu of problems can you solve? You write your scripts. You mark your scripts. We'll give you the resources, and based on what you have written, we'll hold you. And if you don't make that, sorry, we have to let you go. That's when you see people cooperating, because they know exactly what lies at the end if we fall short. But today you see some services that even take delight in seeing to it that the order does not function well. That's because there are no timelines, there are not key performance indicators, there are no benchmarks, there is no target. Let me give you an example outside of corporate governance. I once worked somewhere where we were giving targets quarterly. And we discovered that, you know what, if we bonded together, we could actually meet our targets half the time than if we went individually. So it didn't matter in the department who was senior, who was junior. We just all wanted to breast that tape, dead on time, to specification and what? To the resources appended for the job. So all these things about police, army, inter and intra, they disappear when you hold the chieftains to result. And these results are actually based on their own scripts as written by them, and it flows down the line to the last man.
What do you think, Colonel? Captain?
Yeah, I would want to flow with him. As a matter of fact, let me talk more of job descriptions. When job descriptions are well spelled out, it becomes easier for you to know what role that man is supposed to play, what role this man is supposed to play.
Is it that it's not spelled out at the moment?
Well, I'm not saying it's not spelled out,
Oh,
but
okay.
maybe it's still blurred. Maybe it's still looking blurred. B-L-U-R-R-E-D, blurred, you know. And when you don't have some of such cut categorizations, at times you see yourself stepping on people's toes. However, you could step on people's toes where there is a huge dose of cooperation. Like he talked about, a situation where you suppress certain things just to ensure that you're all able to brace the tape at the right time. That is to say, achieving, giving us results. We cannot put men out there, spend money on them, and yet all we get is this quarrel between them in Taraba,
But
here
Colonel,
and there, and so on.
Colonel, these are fine officers who have been well trained with the country's resources. That is the list of the worries that the country should worry about. They should know better. Shouldn't they?
You are right. You are right. They should be able to suppress whatever personal differences and be able to make sure that, look, we achieve what the results should be to a greater extent.
All right, I think what we'll do when we come back, we can look at some of these potpourri of issues going on in different parts of the country, what's happening. Do they understand how this is spread across the country such that they can identify these targets and move for those targets? We'll attempt to do that when we come back in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, it's our concluding moments now, talking about security or insecurity concerns and challenges, if you will. Well, gentlemen, let me start with you, Mr. Moore. About all of these reports, Lagos, I keep saying Lagos about them. I think that road is going to be narrowed down in a couple of days. So, but then the Abuja-Kaduna road, there's been kidnapping that happened there. We also do have cases of gunmen killing a Catholic priest in Taraba, setting the vehicle ablaze. We also do have Southwest governors who have said, look, that joint task force will be funded by them, as well as the private sector, coming together to come up with that. Then the Southeast governors also coming up with some sort of forestry guards. Do they really, in terms of the security architecture and those who are started with that responsibility, do you think that they have all of this mapped out properly and then they will address it?
I hope so. But in answering your question, let us use a map. I call it a security threat map of Nigeria. And this map kind of addresses in pictures rather than words at a glance what I could use a lot of time to say. When it comes up, you'll see it. Ah, there it is. There it is. I could sit here and speak for 10, 15 minutes, but just look at it. You're going to see lines joining certain threat types to certain parts of the country. And if you observe, the biggest chunk of that map lies in between the northeast, the southwest, and south-south. So you can see what we're talking about, north central and northwest. And all of these parts of the country have their own crime peculiarities. Now, having looked at this entire map, where would we call the intervention point? What is the low-hanging fruit that can actually spark deterrence and fear into already involved or prospective criminals? It's punishment. It's absolutely very, very punishment.
And that's across board?
Across board. Right now, we cannot say we have that. The whole thing is looking prospective. It's about the biggest business you can do. Return on investment is high. Investment is virtually zero. Even banks don't make the kind of profits these guys make. Now, what if we decided to hang one person? Trust me, I've been saying it here since God knows when. I'm happy His Royal Highness has also put his voice to that. Nobody is going to hang you, but if you want to be hanged, just dabble into this. I mean, China is not of this world, and we know what they do to criminals. We have gotten to that stage where these crime sets are holding us by the jugular. They are no longer national security embarrassments. They are national security threats. January to date, on my database, over 1,400 killed spread across these crime sets. If we switched to the second map, which I also provided, you're going to see that the country is virtually crawling with crime. And what's the low-hanging fruit? What's the fast-track approach? Get one scapegoat. Give him his day in court. Let his trial be free and fair, and let the hangman have his day. And you're going to see this thing. Just look at it. From the colors there, this is what the Council for Foreign Relations uses to advise its citizens before they come to Nigeria. So it's an outsider's perspective of what is happening in here based on reported incidents. The red means advice against all travel. The next color, which is looking like a yellow, advice against all but essential travel. And green, which seems to be the mildest, is see our travel advice before traveling.
But it's not that says you can actually be
Exactly.
free.
It's not saying you go and have yourself a nice day, but it's saying, please come and talk to us here. So you find out that you could say from this, and it's
I hope
actually...
you can see it on a bigger screen so that it's not just here. Though.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, but go
yes,
ahead.
indeed. You can actually see from this. I tend to favor this because I'm not going to go to any regions and ask for security appraisal from those in here. You have to take a look at me to know how this dress fits. I won't actually know. So the man who is looking at from outside can give you an independent, impartial, no holds barred account. So you can see that we are actually crawling with crime. And the reason why it has proliferated so much is because, one, almost nil consequences. And where there are consequences, they are a mere tap on the wrist.
So what do you think will be appropriate as a consequence?
Get his head off.
Death penalty.
I mean, that used to be a lingo in the United States in those days. They evolved through this. And when people were caught, they would say, off with his head.
I know you've made reference to this before, the case of when we had this menace of armed robbery of Anini and the rest of them. They faced the hangman. They faced death penalty, firing squad at the time.
Yes.
Did that solve any problem?
Really, you could see, I was in military school during the Anini saga. If you go back to the libraries, after the Anini saga, for a while, it took a lull. Let me tell you something about human beings. Those who do not advocate the death sentence will say, it doesn't solve a problem. It's not meant to solve a problem. It's meant to stem a tide. Then we now start looking at other non-kinetic approaches to solving the problem of crime. Right now, we're on a roller coaster downhill, and these injuries are so desperate, they need desperate cure. What I'm trying to put to you is human beings, right from my nursery school days in the intelligence community as a young operative, my mentor told me a human being, wherever you find him, has two underlying attributes. He's social in nature and is a creature of habit. They have become habited to this, okay? And because they're getting light taps, the stimuli of deterrence is not hard enough. That's why we are social in nature. We respond to stimuli, social stimuli, political stimuli, economic stimuli, name the stimuli.
Now, if I may step in, Colonel Labo, now that we're saying that there should perhaps be, increased punishment, if I can use that term, there's a question of human rights on one hand. You have human rights bodies saying, well, they're looking forward to a time where the death or capital punishment is abolished the world over. There's that on one hand. I'm just trying to help us balance this. Yeah. And there's also the issues of arbitrary arrest, for example. I mean, we still have these reports coming here and there. People say people are just rounded off and they're taken to the cell. So there's this issue. So how can we balance this?
Thank you. Nobody loves you better than you. You can't love me better than I do. Okay? And what do I really mean by that? As a country, we know what our problems are. We know what our issues are. China has told the world, look, to hell with you. Death penalty is going to be there for this, for this, for this. Even the United States, you see how death penalty. the Western world, we can't just sit here and be pretending. We have certain category of crimes in this country which look to stem it. What we need to do is to ensure we bring back certain tough sanctions that will go a long way. If we continue to listen to those who are talking about human rights, other societies are bettering themselves and we are here talking human rights. Meanwhile, who is talking to you about human rights? Some white man in whose own country there isn't human rights. Let him go and start from the US and the UK before coming here.
But we know that the rule of law.
Let me add to this human rights thing. Yeah. I am an advocate of human rights. But you know one thing? I also like to spare a thought for human wrongs.
Isn't that why the law is there?
Nobody
to right the wrongs.
The law is there to fight the wrongs. And if the law is there to fight the wrongs, then why do you need human rights? But then nobody spares a thought for human wrongs. Mm-hmm. You see, I'm not against the man who decides he is entitled to a fair trial, even when he's been caught red-handed. Mm. It's now up to our law enforcement agencies and judiciary to ensure that they get that case properly sealed and delivered. Or else, you're going to have criminals who perpetrated abominable acts going to jail for life. They will be fed on my tax. They'll be accommodated on my tax money. They're going to be treated, if they are sick, on my tax money. What are we talking about here?
So you also belong to that school of thought.
What are we talking about here?
Human rights does not supersede national security. I think that
national interest.
National interest.
See, national interest. National interest itself is meant to be the national interest of human beings, isn't it? Now, what is our national interest? If we were to put this to vote, is it preserving the lives of people who kill in dozens?
But gentlemen, you know that, I mean, even in the service, the rules, they're there to be obeyed, to have a decent,
no, they're there to be broken,
organized.
Chamberlain.
And then when you
the
break
rules
it,
are there to be broken.
but when it's broken, they court-martial. Why do they take the court-martial? Because you have a right to be heard.
That's what I'm saying. You have the right to be heard.
Nobody is saying you shouldn't be heard.
Even if you murdered the devil, you have the right to be heard.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is, if you are found guilty, then we're going to
That's a different case. If you're found guilty, that's normal.
That's the clause.
That's normal.
That's the clause. It's now up to us, our law enforcement agencies, to dot their I's and cross their T's and make good of this particular very level playing field. I have seen people buried in graves that had to be dug by tractors. And I've seen people come out to confess. Is there any kind of evidence that outweighs self-confession? And they are still there in detention and they are being fed on my tax money.
Colonel, you're not to weigh in.
Yes, the point I was just trying to make is that it's not just we taking them to the courts to state their own side of the story and eventually we'll find them guilty. What is the sanction that follows? That is one major problem we have. Our sanctions are so light such that it's of no consequence. And that's why some of us are agitating or advocating for this idea of what's it called, a death sentence to be brought in to bear on
states,
some of this.
Several states in this will still sign the death sentence.
And there's life imprisonment also.
I doubt it.
No, but the law is still there.
Permit me to say, when it comes to endorsing death sentences, most of our governors are chickens. I'm sorry.
Katsina State
They
Governor
get
mentioned it.
cold feet. The only one I know was Adam Oshomole. The rest of them will tend to say, hey, you know what, not in my tenure, let the next person come do it. And those are actually the signals that these criminals feed on.
Yes.
When they know that if you have a very strong native doctor, you will get a life sentence after commutation.
But
you will see a lull in this crime.
There's an anti-terrorism law which has just been put in place in response to all of this. But I guess that's how far we can go. We'll have to end. But a very interesting and stimulating conversation. And thanks for those slides as well. So we've been speaking with Omar Aliyu, security expert, and Colonel Hassan Stan Labo, security consultant, retired colonel. Gentlemen, Always a pleasure to have you both. So there you go. We've had them. You see what they're security people. But next will be the legal people to give us a perspective on what they think should happen or what really is going on that we may have missed or not aware of. That's in a moment. Stay with us.